All right. My name is James Skins. We get the.
Oh, did we not get that?
That was.
Oh, I know.
I can go ahead and start with an introduction. So. Okay. Yeah. Git is pretty much a big. Maybe not everybody uses it all the time for code. There are other management systems, but it's pretty much the heavy hitter. And I think in some respects, it's kind of used so much for code and used so heavily by coders that its advantages as a management system for just about any type of files really is kind of gets pushed to the side a little bit. So I'm hoping to introduce you to ideas of things that you may not have even considered trying to put into source control, and also going through some of the both the joys and pains of doing so. I'll just give you some context as to where this project came from. I was been an author before I really got into technology, and I was working on a novel, and I don't remember exactly where the thought crossed my mind, but I was writing my work in LibreOffice, and this was a novel. It was, right now, I've got my second draft done. It's 90,000 words. And writing it, it's about 200-page document. And writing a 200-page LibreOffice document sucks. It's too big a file. It's too much information all in one place. There's no way around it. Like, in order to work on a novel or a piece of writing that size, in order to start getting anywhere with my stuff, like I would have to read 10 to 15 pages of what I'd written just to refresh my memory. And the amount of time that I would be spending essentially rereading just to get into my mind where the material was, just so I could start, it was a pain. And so I basically sat back and I was starting to do programming in a text editor, and I said to myself, all right, how many of the word processing features that LibreOffice has do you actually use when you write a novel? It was like, I turn my chapter settings bold. I sometimes center my text. Like these were really minuscule features. It was not a big step for me to really hit to just writing my novel in Markdown. Really simple syntax, got a whole bunch of crap completely out of the way, and it left me free to use command line tools, including Git. And I started to manage my novel in Git, and it was very much a relief. I found, in terms of working, that it allowed me to, first of all, if I got an idea for something that might happen in the middle of a story, if I was working in LibreOffice, I'd just have to like sketch a note and maybe get back to it, because in order to fit something in the middle of two ideas that I have, I'd be reading like 25 pages of text on both sides to make sure they fit together. Like when I had the ability to work with multiple chapters within the text editor, right? I don't have to, I was using Vim, I would be able to go back and forth in between chapters. There was 21, and you know, I wouldn't have to spend 10 minutes looking for the beginning of a chapter in order to start writing. It was the problems that I encountered with LibreOffice. Until I started using programming tools, I didn't really know of another solution, but I found Git, and it really took the load off. So I definitely approached this from a writing background, and which I am pretty excited to talk to programmers about it, because when you start managing Git, when you start managing something other than code in Git, you start to both question some of your assumptions that you've made, and you kind of start to, I think in terms of some of the code that I write now, in addition, is also like a lot clearer, and I use Git better, having worked with different kinds of mediums with it.
Okay, so I switched over to my deck. Got this beautiful Mac here, and you put Linux on it. This, we've been having let's say, not a good love affair. Me and this projector tonight. Not best of friends, by any means. But I'm hoping that OpenOffice was just open in PowerPoint. Is it a bad hope?
You used to have computers installed.
We have a Windows deck.
It doesn't have any.
Okay.
RDP into his computer or computers.
Well, that'll be next.
Okay.
I have a computer that is my own that has OpenOffice, so it should just open it right up.
Okay.
One thing we have a lot of in this room is computers. I'm sorry, I should have.
Yeah, it's cool. Okay, so my slides are orphaned out. I have actually two examples of stuff that you might consider source controlling. One that I've been playing with and trying to get to work, which was chess. I don't know if there are any chess enthusiasts in the audience. Anyone? Okay, I saw someone not there. I've been working on getting a game managed so you can learn from your mistakes a little better. All right, okay, there we go with that.
Thank you.
All right, wait, was it bouncing at the bouncing zone?
It doesn't like HDMI, it just doesn't like HDMI. Thank you.
Oh.
So I'm surprised that Ubuntu doesn't have the drivers for this Thunderbolt thing.
No, it was a pain to get Linux on a Mac for the first time. So it'll be easier. Yeah, especially that other one. I should have played. Press play. Okay. All right. So so I'll just use my slides as notes until they come up. The first thing to talk about before actually going into Git for programming, I really want to whittle down what it is that I think makes Git so awesome for code. Like, why is code a medium that's so useful in Git? I mean, it was designed around the way code operates, but what is it about code that makes Git work so well with the writing and developing and maintaining of code? And I come up with really 3 things that I think make code and Git work so well together. First of all, that code bases are huge. They're typically so big that nobody can really keep them all in their head at once. And I mean, it's really, coding tends to involve so many logical details. It's hard to keep like an entire class like in your head, like a big class in your head at once, or an API in your head all at once, let alone an entire code base. So on some level, like, code needs something to manage changes. And there's no getting around it. It's too complicated for somebody to understand individually, and frequently you're working on it in teams. So, I mean, that's even bigger. And the 2 that kind of work together is coding is complex and it's brittle. A lot of times you're you can see very drastic shifts in your program based on very few changes in your code. Right? It doesn't take too much to really stop a program dead in its tracks. On the other hand, sometimes bugs are they're not always trivial fixes, but they can be sometimes fixed with very little line of code. So it's something that breaks easy and you have to be careful with. And at the same time, because it breaks easy and you have to be careful with, we kind of make an effort to keep ourselves away from the nitty-gritty little details, right? We have abstractions and reusable code, functions, classes, APIs, all that stuff. And Git is really good at both managing a bunch of distributed files everywhere, and then line changes, like small line changes on this file structure that you have whenever you have a mature application. Those are the things that I think really make Git strong. Is it can programmatically compare differences between files. It can programmatically find where you've made important changes. So again, just to reiterate, coding is a very modular activity, and again, small changes really add up. And if you can organize those changes into something that makes sense, right, that's extremely useful in terms of navigating what it is that you're doing. And that's basically what Git does. It sort of constructs how your project is changed in these various files and lines where you've implemented various instructions to the computer. When you move outside of code, some of these assumptions do not hold. Your project, I took the chess game as an example, it might not be big enough that it necessarily needs skill. you might come into a situation where it's helpful but not necessary, because what you're looking at is simple enough that you don't need this complicated tool to track your history. If what you're working on doesn't break up into small pieces that are easily compared with Git diff and its various flags, that creates a real problem, right? Git is a matter of being able to very quickly see how things have changed. If you don't have small changes adding up over time, Git diff starts to become less and less useful. I mean, especially when you move to something like an image, right? And you change an image and commit both versions. You run a diff, you get files different. Yeah, that sucks. I'm going to talk about, there are ways to mitigate that. There are certain configuration options you have available to make things like pictures and such actually show meaningful changes other than binary files differing. Also, you may have a problem. Again, like I said, Git likes to think of things in terms of lines and files and pieces, snapshots of your project. Getting your project in a form that's modular enough that Git can actually see interesting changes, right? That's something that I found, for instance, very troublesome when I took the chance to try and think of what would it look like to manage a chess game. Like what would I want to do? And it's pretty much, you're in a position where you can't really break down changes into anything other than like basically single moves. Chess is a great candidate, like learning from a game that you've played is a good candidate. It's very code-like in the sense that a bad move can have terrible consequences, but several turns later. This particular game is, I chose a famous Bobby Fischer game just as my illustration. But looking at the game, like the white who gets creamed makes a horrible move, I think around 11, and then he pays for it in 17. So what's cool about approaching a chess game this way is that you can really go back and look and see those subtle moves that you didn't think were necessarily very important. It turned out to be very important, kind of the way software bugs work. You can sort of branch off and see how a game would have altered if you decided to play differently. But there's a couple of problems that I find in this basic setup. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to talk about how to go about actually getting something workable. One of the issues is, let's say that right here you just have a move list and a markdown file. What you run into if you decide to make a variation is you can commit every move, and then whenever you think about which move you want to change, you can just start off a branch and start up a whole new game, like right off the bat, and you can keep track of both of those variations like really simply. That's pretty cool. But if you want to compare where you're at any given point, you kind of also need the board position. And there is ways to do that, but what you run into issue is if you want to source control every move. You're committing every move. And then you also need to write down the board position and do all that, and then commit all that, and then that's just for one move. You can do it, but on a certain level, it's painful. This is a game you want to play, right? It's a little unsatisfactory to have to write so much to do so little. And again, at this point, really what's at issue is the size of your commit. What's the important information? And your ability to compare states of the game, right? At this point, without a good way of writing a board position like really fast, and then getting the discipline to commit every move, you're kind of stuck. And graphical chess games tend to have their own history mechanisms that are so much faster that you try to source control something like this, you end up in a situation where the temptation to just use the history that's already in the program really bothers me. There's just a lot of it looks simple, but there are issues and problems. And I think really at the heart of it is getting a process together where you are committing enough useful information in a way that can be easily compared. And I think that's really the challenge of any Git project, or any project that you manage in Git, is figuring out what you're doing with Git commit. On the one hand, if you're using Git, you use Git commit all the time, but working down into what it is you really need out of something can be a challenge. And I want to go back to solving this chess challenge, but it involves some advanced configuration that I've been playing with. So I want to go into where I've used it in practice, which was my novel. The novel also, it was too big for me to keep in my head. I mean, that's part of writing it down, but I mean with Git, that's also part of great about source control, right? I don't have to hold everything in my mind. I've got a tool that will keep track of changes. And language and narrative, again, you're in that struggle of getting Git diff to tell you useful information, trying to come up with data and comparisons that are meaningful. Language and narrative, right, they're sort of modular in the sense of, words create sentences, create paragraphs, create chapters, etc. But finding that sweet spot where you get real information is a challenge. And I'll talk about some of the specifics with writing, since I have been so familiar with it. Okay, all right. So I have an issue. I organized my novel into Markdown file per chapter. And then I basically, my real unit of change, my real module was the chapter. And there were there were some things I had to do to work around to get diff to really tell me information about my changes. First of all, really big was spelling. I wasn't using an interactive spell checker. I was using Vim, which, I mean, it's great. It's really fast. If you're good at it, it's it's a joy to use, but it doesn't check your spelling for you. You got to do that yourself. And on a chapter level, you're looking at 15 to 40 misspelled words a file. Git notices that. It's useless information. It is. I wrote basically, my markdown files was basically, it was a paragraph a line. So, if I had a long winding paragraph, I'd just let them wrap it. But I'd have, 250 word long, one line, basically one line, and I change the spelling of a word on that line. Suddenly Git says, oh, here's something great and important. No, it's not great and important. I just changed the spelling error on a word. And so there were a lot of operations that created noise. I think in programming, a lot of times, like you have a misspelled function in programming. Well, that's huge news. That means your program may completely brick. But in language, getting your spelling right is more of a refinement of what you're trying to say, right? Spelling errors suck in writing because they keep your reader away from what you're trying to say, and they focus it on your incorrect usage of the language. But when you fix the language and you use it correctly, you don't actually end up changing the meaning, but you do end up changing the bytes, and Git notices that, and that creates a big problem. Another problem, again, I talked about basically my chapter was really the most modular I could get my files to produce something meaningful. And sometimes with a chapter, when it comes to writing, actually I shouldn't say sometimes when it comes to writing. When it comes to writing, if you're going to write something well, your first draft is pretty much a throwaway draft. Like it's something you do as an exercise to clarify your thinking, to get ideas down on paper, and then you pretty much just throw it away. So I had a lot of instances, since I organized this on the chapter level, where basically I had 2 chapters that contained nothing that was similar. Right? That's it. It's basically a binary files differ kind of difference. Actually, depending on your management, a simple binary files differ kind of difference is actually sometimes very important, however. Just knowing I've done a chapter rewrite is good. I need to have done chapter rewrites on all of my chapters, and keeping track of having done that is useful. So, but if I go to try and look at the diff for changes in my chapter and look at it, not so well. So, what I find basically between having these things like spelling errors, these little tiny line changes that don't actually mean anything, and then these huge, gigantic diffs that have an enormous amount of change, like the entire chapter is changed. The concept that really broke, that I felt I had to get away from, was the atomic commit. The idea behind Git is really commit early, commit often. Get the smallest amount of change that is meaningful, and then put a nice message on it and leave it for posterity. I found there were instances where this logic didn't really hold. What I started to think about with Git was, how do I make my commit the most meaningful commit? Like, how exactly does one put meaning into a commit? So I want to take an example of a commit that I found was very meaningful and not atomic in any way, which was my spell check commit. I talked about spelling previously. It's getting it done. It's one of those tasks that's not fun, but you have to do it. If you start reading a story that has spelling errors, like in the first couple of pages, you're going to think either the writer doesn't have enough command of the language to tell a good story, or he doesn't care enough about his story. You're going to put it down. Just no matter what the high quality of the story is, it's sort of what sloppy code looks like essentially for a writer. You're like, nah, this probably doesn't work. I don't want to get involved with this project. Look at how he's organized his code, etc. It's the same way. You've got to get spelling done right. Now, there is really no possibility that I'm actually going to have to roll back my project to inspect how I decided to change my spelling, right? The idea of breaking changes that would need me to go back to a commit would make me have to inspect the commit that I had done previously to see what was different. Not an issue. What was really important was I need to know that all my chapters have been spell checked and nothing's been added to them since they were spell checked. So what it became useful for me to do was to simply spell check everything at once at the very end and commit it all. That way I pretty much can look at my spell check commit, like I said, very not atomic, very not something you'd want to see in programming, but it tells me the most, it maximizes the information, it tells me what I need, which is, you don't have to worry about your spelling. Again, not something I could have done with LibreOffice. LibreOffice, I suppose I could, put some sort of mark somewhere in the file that says I've spell checked this or something like that, or I've edited it, but having this nice system that sort of just pretty much tells you when files have been touched, altered, and changed, and oh look, this is my next to last commit in my history since my edit. Now, again, the difference between what necessarily makes for your ideal commit can actually be really subtle. And there was a type of commit that I ended up doing that I felt actually is very similar to spell checking, but shows what made it a really good idea for me to just commit everything into one big giant commit for my spell checking. It didn't necessarily follow for every single other operation that might look like. Dialogue tagging is pretty similar to spelling. For me, as a writer, I tend to hear a story as it develops. It's a very audio process for me, so I forget to indicate who's speaking when I write. And when people sit down and go through my stuff, I'm like, I can't tell who's speaking, right? Well, you don't want your reader going back and sitting there trying to riddle out how someone's talking. It's like, you put comments in code so that people don't always have to riddle out every single detail. You mark who's speaking for the same reason. You don't want them to have to put all this thought into who's talking. You want them to go on with the story. Again, the likelihood of breaking changes was extremely low. The actual meaning that I was adding to this story, also pretty low. What I was really doing was adding polish. I was letting my readers know who was talking. However, the operation of indicating who's speaking grammatically is very regular. Spell checking, you've got words in random places everywhere. With dialogue tagging, I'm almost always targeting lines that are in quotations and putting information about who's speaking at the end of a sentence, right? So this isn't necessarily useful for me to check for one change. But as I start to change and start adding dialogue over an entire chapter, if I commit that change, I can start to see how much I've been doing of it, what my strategy is. And if I do that over a significant number of my chapters, I send this off to an editor. They say, you know, you really need to add more tags to your dialogue. Well, I've got all these dialogue tag commits. I can go back and reference and say, hey, all right, these are the chapters that probably need the most work. And I can sort of pinpoint. So tagging who's speaking was information that was worth putting down. I didn't necessarily make it my process to do it with every single chapter, but it was definitely a strategy that I employed to get an idea of what was happening in my novel, because dialogue tagging is something that I have been terrible at as a writer since I started writing. So, I mean, it's just part of my process, really. One of the great things that Git has is this nice flag called --worddiff. You can actually get Git to start comparing files based on white space changes instead of line changes. So in my dialogue tag commits, I've got a really nice indication of how I've edited my chapter. And I'm going to talk about some of the options that you have with Git diff in working with trying to get like a good comparison, because every project is really thinking about how you can maximize your comparisons when they're available. It can take some real work to start getting Git diff to be the workhorse it is in programming. Logs. I thought that because Git diff was kind of going to be a little funky, that I should standardize my commit messages. Like I wrote on a chapter level, so I decided, all right, okay, I'm gonna say where I consider the chapter to be like drafted or complete or fragment or whatever like that. Include characters, include a few ideas of the themes of the chapter, and a chapter summary. Basically, on any major commit that involved a chapter. I tended to do commits that were chapter-based because those tended to be where I could see the most meaning. And I have to say, personally, having done a project now where I've standardized my commit messages, if you're not doing it, I recommend you start. Commit messages really pay back. First of all, just the act of writing them really keeps what you're doing in your mind, particularly if you know that the commit has to have certain information, right? It brings that information up, makes you keep track of it. And also, I like to think of Git as sort of a search engine for the history of your project. So if you're looking for how something's changed, you have to craft a Git command that will tell you the information. Well, if you know certain information is in there, it's a guarantee because you've standardized your messages, you can start querying your logs much, much faster. Git log has a number of nice flags, git log --grep. There are a number of instances of stuff where you can start kicking out what you want to see in a log, like really quickly. For instance, in my work, because I made sure that every chapter had a character list, if I want to look at a particular character in a chapter, I know everywhere that they appear, and I know every file that they're in, and I can systematically change some aspect about them. Again, can't do that with the commit messages that I haven't decided characters are always in them. But if they're always in them, it really adds to both your ability to search and the inventiveness of your search, your ability to come up with ways to look at your project. Okay, so this was a standard commit for me. Basically, I had what's great. What I want out of a commit message is I can look at this and see what it does. I can see what the changes are, and unless I really need to dig down to the nitty-gritty, I don't have to actually look at the diffs and everything. I can just look at this and say, all right, okay, so I got a good idea of what's in this chapter. So I got its status, I've got its synopsis. The amount of deletions and insertions tell me that it was probably a big edit, but not necessarily a rewrite. There's a tag up there that basically says what I did, annotation / dialogue tag / polish. So I did a fairly significant edit, but not an enormous one where I started redrafting. And I can tell that just from the commit message. That's what's great about having your standard commit, is you can look at it and move on if you don't need to inspect it.
Sorry, I have a question real quick.
Okay.
Just about the last one. So is there a version, so if you change something in your chapter, let's say, when you rewrite the synopsis, because you want to log that, so I'm just trying to think of how you have it set up if you're going to track changes in this chapter. Is that something that you want to know, or does it matter? I mean, for your purpose of writing it specifically.
I would if I change the chapter, I would redo the synopsis. It's pretty trivial to get to just look at individual files. It's a matter of git log -- and then start naming the files that you want to look at that it touches. So yeah, if I made a big enough change that I really changed what the chapter is actually about, rewrite the synopsis, and then I would, whenever I go to git log, I would read that synopsis, and if I kept going, wanting more information, I'd see, oh, okay, all right, well, yeah, okay, I made some pretty significant changes to this chapter. Maybe I need to reread the chapter to refresh my memory. That was what was great with the Git process, was I wasn't forced to write a story from start to finish. I could work on chapter 13 and then chapter 17 and then chapter 6, and because I had all this information about my files and where my project was going and these nice commit messages, I could work and then get back to it. I didn't have to leave a good idea in the back of my mind and then forget about it. I could work on what was important, and also, like, if I was, necessarily like bored or tired, I could work on the really interesting parts of the novel, and when I was more energetic and willing to do work, I could work on the duller, more uninteresting novel, the connecting pieces or the editing or something that was not have that fun level. I could sort of determine how I could work. Like, I could decide, I want to write something fun in the novel today. all right, I'm willing to do work. Let's look at the logs and see where the work still is that I need to work on. Yeah.
I really love semantic commits like this, but with that rigidity that you have there, like how often at the beginning did you have to change commit messages? Like, and how long did it take to get to where you were like, oh, this is my format and I like it? Or, because
That you're getting enough information
How
out of
long
it
does it take
that-
to really get to a point where you can standardize commit messages and like where you can get to a standard and where you can get to where you know the standard is paying off,
even
right?
even just
how many times do I have to rewrite commit messages?
even just like commit flows. Like I know that a lot of times I'm like I'll type in first like I'm dumb for my commit message, and I'm like, no, that's a terrible commit message, and I actually give more semantics of what I actually did.
Yeah.
And sometimes like I'll mess up and actually just send it off. Like, how often were you like manipulating this? Because that synopsis is writing in and of itself. Like
Yeah.
over time you might like you were saying, like if you do a rewrite, obviously you're gonna rewrite the synopsis. Sometimes if you look at the synopsis and go, that wasn't it. No, I didn't read that. Because it's kind of
Actually,
meta, right?
okay,
it's
so-
the meta that lives out here.
Actually, so what I did to make sure that this process worked actually was typically since I was writing in Markdown that was going to get turned to HTML, I just wrote HTML comments that had this kind of information in it. And basically, whenever I was done writing, I'd check, what was in the file and then stick it in the commit message. And like if it hadn't, if my file hadn't, if the story idea didn't really change too much, I worked on more of the polish and the language. I just take pretty much verbatim what was down in that file. So a lot of this,
novel
a
development.
lot of this information was actually already in the file in the form of comments, and then when I got to it, I would already have that information available. That definitely, now that I think about it, definitely did take the load off. Having the information that I was going to put in the commit, like at the bottom of the file.
Right.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's the logs read really well as a result of this, and I got through a second draft, and I am kind of at the point where I put it aside, and a third draft is probably a decision. It's a 90,000 page novel. A third draft is probably going to be a decision made because of desire of somebody to want to publish the story. But I'm sure when I go back, I'll be like, I'll have this great log, and I'll be like, you picked up that project. You haven't worked on this since February of 2017. You just picked it straight up. How did that happen? Well, I had this nice thing. Don't get it. All right, so I got to work back to issues that I was working with previously on the chess game to start talking to you about what options you have. Because in my novel, I had the option to. Okay, all right. I really had the option to choose the format because it didn't need a lot of formatting really. It was just text. I could choose Markdown, or I could choose some other similar like text-based syntax language. But in a lot of cases, when you're managing different things, you're going to run into getting those compares to fit into something that's not quite designed to do. So from the command line, again, I mentioned git -- word diff, excellent for when a change really only when a change doesn't really alter the line much, and it's just the words that matter. You can actually tell Git to, when you do a word diff, you can actually give Git a regular expression that defines what a word is. That's beyond me. But you can do that. The presentation is kind of I had to work with my slides getting cut off. Grows a regular expression that I came across. In some languages, like in the text formatting language, commands might not necessarily be separated by spaces, but backslashes. So down there, where you can't really read it, is a regular expression that defines a word boundary as potentially including a backslash in addition to spaces. Your Git configuration file, this was just an example, but like I said, diff text, that actually gave a regular expression for words that would allow you to get a more clear picture of what was going on. You can define how Git manages diff, and there are multiple configuration settings that you can use. You can bring in an external program to run diffs with Git diff. The problem being that you don't get all the options that come with Git diff. You get the external program instead. Git also has this great feature for defining diffs, where basically you can, the setting option is it's text conf. I wish I could pull it up on this particular photo, but basically what it does is whenever it hits a file of a certain type, you've got to basically, you can set certain file types to have certain types of diffs, and you can set it so that instead of comparing a file, Git will turn that file into a string, and then whenever it goes to turn it to a string. So for instance, you can turn a photo into photo metadata, and whenever you go to compare files, instead of getting this unhelpful Git binary files differ, you will actually get metadata about changes in your file. Now, getting some metadata that's actually going to be able to help you visualize what changes made in the photo, that's some work. I've been looking at that question. I haven't gotten too far with it, but pretty much any file, you can, instead of comparing the differences, you can tell Git to turn it into a string and then compare it to other strings later in the file. And that's really the missing piece in my chess story, which is chess programs have this nice notation. Pleasure to read, I'm sure, but it's called Forsyth-Edwards notation, but it's a notation that basically gives you all the information you would need to pick up a chess game at any given position, right? So we talked about the problems being comparing positions. One of the issues that I find with a fen string, however, is people talk about files being human readable or human writable, and I have started thinking about files being human comparable, since I've been thinking about getting diffs that look good. And fen strings are hard to compare the position that they're in with what a board actually looks like. But your text configuration option doesn't just allow you to call a simple program. It actually lets you call out a script that will change your file systematically. So some of the, for images, some of your more, your commands that have some nice options, you can end up putting those in a shell script. Or you can take a string like this, and I just sort of hacked out all the backslashes and then turned all the, basically, defense strings, they work by, the letters are all pieces, and then spaces are indicated by numbers. So like 4 consecutive spaces is, or 4 is 4 consecutive blank spaces, etc. So I wrote a program, it's on this computer unfortunately, lets you compare. And once you get basically into a chess program that will then write this position for you, becomes a lot more fun to actually sit there and control a chess game. Getting that comparison and finding out where the differences are. So what I've been doing is just playing a game and then going back and looking towards the particularly interesting moves, recording the string along with the commit message, and then I can sort of compare, instead of going to comparing every 40, 80 moves in a chess game, just comparing the board position at maybe 5 or 6 critical moves. It's been very informative.
So does it help you win more games?
I have yet to figure that out. I've gotten into more chess games recently. Typically, I'm in a position where I'm better than the average person, but not better than the average player. So I'm somewhere in the middle. Chess does require just a lot of sheer practice, but it definitely, there's some, the game that I managed, there's definitely some mistakes I think have been really hammered into me as mistakes as a result of going through that chess game so thoroughly.
So are you able to turn out any numbers like likelihood for success move by move? I'm just thinking like, in World Series of Poker, it's like by number of outs you have, like percentage who would win kind of thing?
Most, the chess games that I have come across, the programmers are typically kind enough to give you the number that the artificial intelligence is using to determine like where you are. I've been using Xboard, which is for Linux, and I don't know what other platforms it might have gotten elsewhere. And there's a number that it gives you. Honestly, I haven't found those numbers to be. Those are really numbers for machines, and I haven't been able to really find them useful. The only time they tend to turn up something really useful is when you've just made a really stupid move and you see your number of probability of losing just skyrocket. That's pretty much where those numbers tell you.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, they fluctuate down pretty good. Although you can set export to record where the computer is and thinking about the game, like every move. Chess has some good like standardized notation. Like there are like standards for how things are going to be represented, and they're in text, which really helps in terms of being able to add additional notation and stuff like that.
And another game with really good standardized notation is baseball.
Baseball.
Turn it on to baseball. Turn it on to the play-by-play of baseball.
Play-by-play of baseball. I had that one completely slipped my mind. I hadn't thought of that. Baseball is really statistically driven, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And it's getting more so that way. They're getting that. players that they're finding through statistics.
Or card counting.
What?
Or card counting, you know, if you want to go that route. So I'll retire early, I guess.
I don't know. That one I have difficulty imagining. Sorry, dealer. I need to. I'm not sure if I want to bet. Could you give me some time to commit? Not seeing that one so much, but anyway. Any questions? Oh, okay. Was that okay? All right.
For what it's worth, we do our monthly report that we do for our whole department. It's all markdown files in a Git repository, and you do a PR for your contribution to the file, and then someone reviews your request before it goes in, so that we do Git flow on top of markdown to produce it, and then we just use latex to turn it all into one giant PDF at the end that gets sent to the CIO and to the client. And the whole thing is inside of Git. It makes it
Yeah.
super simple, and then that way people can't do any really wacky formatting. We used to use Word for that, but then like managing a document that has 50 authors in it gets really, really complicated even with SharePoint. And so we're trying doing the whole thing in Markdown and Git flow. So
Yeah, it's, I haven't found any collaborators yet on some of these side projects that I've been working with. But yeah, there's also, I know there's a fairly good tool set for converting Oculus documents to just pure text. But yeah, it is, Markdown is a much cheaper format.
So we're doing something similar with GraphViz, so we're not using Visio or OmniGraffle or anything. We're just doing network diagrams with like GraphViz and then checking that into source control, because you can get a diff on not only the markup, but you can do like a visual diff.
On Visio drawings?
Huh?
it's not GraphViz.
Oh,
GraphViz,
GraphViz, okay.
yeah, it reads like a dot file.
Okay.
GraphViz.
The syntax for GraphViz always drives me crazy though.
Yeah, that's why you kind of have to have templates for people to use. Or variables.
Yes.
That's cool. It's cool to. I had all these ideas about where I wanted to go with trying to manage other systems, and I was thinking of trying to get like a bunch of various projects up together for a book, and then having a VM so that you wouldn't have to install everything. It was interesting to see somebody else had that idea. Selling a VM along with a book that just has everything in it, so I don't have to worry about because these projects would be very much me coming up with an idea. I've been trying music. It's in the very early
Probably works for
stages,
tabs or
but-
something, right?
What?
Probably works for like guitar tabs. That's very visual.
There's a great it looks very latex like. It's called Lily Pond, but it's for it's mostly for creating sheet music, but it also will you can take files and they'll compile to MIDI, and I've been using that. It's been interesting because in terms of song composition, like I can name a certain sequence of notes, like maybe 16 or 32 or whatever number of however long I want to make a piece, and then just write it out as a variable, and then just sort of basically in the score just have a list of the pieces that I've defined, so I can just essentially look at a song in like 10 to 15 lines and understand what's going on. So it's been pretty cool. I haven't really composed music This is a new experience for me. That's another thing that I've been trying.
Committee seems doable. Tabs would be hard because what we talked about before, your grouping is, on most tabs I've seen, is the horizontal group here, and then your line this way would be what Git considers to be the.
Yeah.
There is
But if you
actually
did the word
interesting,
diff-
I don't know if it would work in this case, but I saw on my computer what I did with my fen strings. The problem of creating like an ASCII board and comparing it with diff is you basically want to see like your whole board on one end and your whole board on the other, so you can look at the differences. But since Git is managed in lines, it'll start like mixing the boards together. But I managed to hack around that by getting all the ASCII representation of my board, just using a combination of vertical tabs and carriage returns for lines instead of line feeds. And so Git looks at it and says this is one line and doesn't mix the two diffs. And then all you have to do is pipe the output of Git diff through a program that actually formats those characters correctly, like cat, and you get a nice board by board sort of thing. Like there are definitely hacks to get around. Like the line issue is definitely something to consider. There's a lot of ways around it. All right, cool.
Thanks for the LilyCon suggestion, it's pretty cool.
Okay. My novel was called Theater of Hades. It's on GitHub at under Star Vagrant. And then I was also thinking about trying to come up with a story that actually leveraged Git even more than my original story, which would be a story that I actually had like multiple endings, or I had branches of where the story might go. I thought would be pretty cool. But I haven't gotten anywhere with that particular project. I've been trying to push what Git can do, and now I'm at a point where, well, I really have gotten my book through it. Now I want to really play with it. So I had an idea of a mystery story, and that's up in my GitHub repo called Gang of Gits, which was supposed to be two detectives where you could actually, start choosing who you thought were suspects and following them more closely, and such. Anything else? All right, cool.
That was powerful.
Thank you. The thing that came up to me was, I think you said something about chess having its own history type of feature, but it seems like whether it's OpenOffice or Word or whatever, has its own history feature, and you can Command Z back a line, and then if you make one fork, you lose everything that you Command Z, right? That sucks. But I mean, there's like no common way to help you go back down that fork, other than like Git with the history type of thing.
Yeah,
But have you ever noticed that?
exactly.
Like you're like, I know I did something in Command Z about 8 times.
Yeah,
You're like,
yeah.
oh, okay, here, I'll fix that real quick. And then you're like, Command Shift C.
I know, yeah, I know, manuals that I've read on GIMP suggest getting around that particular dilemma by every time you have an idea of what you want to do, make a new layer.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, you.
I think there's sometimes
yeah.
GIMP is set up so that every time you make a significant change, then a new layer is created. But I've ran into times like that. I make 5 changes. I'm like, shit, 5 layers. That was all one semantic idea. Just wash that down.
Yeah, so, and again, like I said, that's why I brought up another program's history as something to take into account while you're managing, because if a history ends up doing a better job for you, you're going to be tempted not to go through the process of writing commits. I mean, it does, the process of writing commits slows you down so that big disasters in your future, or it's an investment to keep big disasters in your future from coming back to you. And if you are in a situation where those big disasters aren't really there, that can kind of be a reason to feel like Git isn't the proper tool, because you have, a simplified history mechanism that does the job.
Well, yeah, the other thing is OpenOffice, Word, all those, they flush the cache of your changes when you save and post. And so if you were looking for history, as opposed to like short term, just back up type of thing. Rad, man. Good stuff. Thank you.
You do versions though.
Is that ministry?
I do like a primary, like when I did my master's thesis, I worked out a way to work around some of that. It's like poor man's source control. Before I knew it happened.
I remember the first time I started writing code in college for anything meaningful, I was writing this motor program, where it was a Visual Basic interface that ran this like electric motor, like made it spin, and then eventually put stuff on it, like the chassis and everything, so you could actually like press a button and pretend like you're in the gas or whatever. And I had it all working, and then like I did about 20 minutes worth of work, and I screwed it up royally. And right then I realized, oh, if I could go back that 15, 20 minutes ago to when I had something working, I would have saved that. So then I just started I would copy them. Every time I got something working, I would just copy and paste it over into a folder.